Blood travels into the right atrium via the superior/inferior vena cava. Once the right atrium is filled up, it then travels into the right ventricle via the tricuspid valve. Once the blood has traveled into the right ventricle, the valve then closes to prevent backflow back into the right atrium. Once the ventricle is filled up, it then travels through the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary valve. Once the blood travels through the valve then closes to prevent backflow back into the right ventricle. Blood then becomes oxygenated through gaseous exchange, which occurs in the lungs. Once gaseous exchange has occurred in the lungs, the oxygenated blood then travels through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. Once the left atrium has filled up, it then travels into the left ventricle through the bicuspid valve. Once the left ventricle is filled up, the bicuspid valve then closes to prevent backflow back into the left atrium. Vent, the Once the left ventricle is filled, the blood then travels into the aorta through the aortic valve, and then blood then travels through the rest of the body. There's a sinoatrial node found in the right atrium which detects the amount of blood that's inside the right atrium. Once the node has detected that there's a high amount of blood in the atrium, it then sends an impulse to the atrioventricular node, which then tells um the tricuspid valve to open up, which allows the blood to travel to the ventricle. Once the um once the right atrium is then empty, the the sinoatrial node then detects that it's empty, which naturally causes the bicuspid valve to close, which also helps it to prevent backflow. The bundle of his then detects that there is blood in the ventricle, which then causes the Purkinje fibers in the septum and also in the wall of the heart to cause the ventricles to contract, which then shoots blood into the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Moving on to the blood vessels. Here is the artery, the capillary, and the vein. The artery has a very small lumen but a very thick muscular band and elastic fibers so it allows the artery to vasoconstrict and vasodilate. Vasodilation is when the blood vessel widens to allow more blood to travel through the lumen or the cavity of the blood vessel. And vasoconstriction is blood when the blood vessel tightens so that blood is able to travel at a higher pressure but with lower amounts of blood. The artery naturally carries blood at a higher pressure because of its thick and muscular band and its very narrow lumen. However, the vein has a much wider lumen, which means the muscular band is a lot thinner than the artery, which causes the blood to be traveled at a lower pressure. And also, it has a very thick outer wall, which has a very thick endothelium, which means the artery has a thick endothelium because it reduces the effect of friction, which means that it's able to travel at higher pressure. But the vein has a thinner endothelium because it travels at a lower pressure, so there's less friction along the edge of the walls for the vein. Veins also have valves to prevent backflow and from it flowing into the wrong parts of the body or the heart. Smaller arteries are called arterioles and smaller veins are called venules. Capillaries are one cell thick and an elastic they don't have an elastic fiber or connective tissue. They have a very small endothelium and they're one cell thick, which allows it to have diffusion in the lungs because it's only one cell thick, so the gas is able to pass through the cell a lot easier than it would be able to pass through arteries or veins or arterioles or venules because it's a lot thicker than capillaries. Moving on to the functions of the cardiovascular system. The first function is removal of waste products. This means that through breathing, we are removing waste products such as lactic acid and carbon dioxide. This is because when through gastric exchange, when we breathe out, our body we inhale oxygen and we exhale CO2 or carbon dioxide, which is a result of gas exchange and breathing. Number two is the production of hormones such as endorphins, adrenaline, estrogen, testosterone. This happens depending on the mood that we have or how we're feeling. Number three is homeostasis or thermoregulation, which is when our body it adapts to the outer temperature. So if it is cold outside, if it's cold outside, or like if it's too hot, our body will start to sweat, which causes like water or sweat to appear on our face, which then cools our blood vessels down or cools our head down. Four is in the bloodstream there are platelets, red blood cells, white blood cells, and plasma. White blood cells, which is number four, is part of the immune system, and it helps to keep our body like feeling well. For an example, white blood cells or lymphocytes or leukocytes will help to um fight off infections such as bacterial pathogens, and um they also memorize um when another bacteria like trying to attack us again. Number five is blood clotting, which is this is when we either have a scab or a bruise, and the components in our blood, such as the platelets and the white blood cells, they form together to create almost as if like like a chemical plaster, like like a chemical self-made plaster on our body, so that so that the blood clots, and it prevents blood from like leaving our body. Going back to the third function of the cardiovascular system, it is thermoregulation, which is how a body maintains the natural body temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius. What it does is that when we are hot, our body, it like I said before, it starts to sweat from our sweat glands, so that the water on the surface of our skin, it starts to cool down our body. But when we're cold, our hairs on our arms or hairs on our legs start to stand on end, so that our body is able to cool down, so that our body is able to gather more heat from our surroundings. Also we start to shiver, which is also known as micro muscle contractions, which when our muscles contract, they start to heat up as the blood is now going to our muscles. So by shivering, our blood is going to our muscles, which is naturally warming up our body.